Imagine you are sitting in a hospital gown. You're completely terrified, just waiting for a diagnosis that might change your entire life.
Right, the stakes are literally as high as they get.
Exactly. So the door opens, your doctor walks in, but instead of looking you in the eye or taking your hand or really even talking to you, they just spend the next 10 minutes staring at an iPad.
Just furiously clicking approve on some checklist.
Yeah, a checklist generated by an algorithm they don't even fully understand. If you have ever felt like your doctor is treating you like, a data point on a screen rather than a human being, well, this is exactly why.
It's a very real, very unsettling experience.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we are unpacking a massive, entirely unannounced shift happening in healthcare right now. We are looking at how artificial intelligence is quietly transforming clinicians from active caregivers into, well, basically passive monitors.
And it's happening largely under the radar.
It really is. Our foundation for this exploration is this brilliant piece of research titled The Fragility of Supervision, Clinical Judgment in the AI Era. And honestly, the reality it exposes is arguably much more dangerous than any sci-fi dystopia where robot doctors take over.
Oh, absolutely. It is a profound shift. And to really grasp the magnitude of what you just described with that patient in the gown, we have to look at the historical context of what it actually means to practice medicine.
Right, because this changes the core definition of the job.
Exactly. For centuries, literally since the dawn of the profession, medicine has been a judgment-based practice. Think about it. Technology has always been introduced into the hospital, right?
Sure, like the invention of the stethoscope.
The stethoscope, the introduction of MRI machines, the massive shift to electronic health records. But through all of those advancements, the clinician always remained the primary locus of interpretation.
They were the ones putting the puzzle pieces together.
Yes. They took the raw evidence, combined it with the specific, really messy context of the individual patient sitting in front of them, and then synthesized it using human experience into a final decision.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that distinction is so crucial. The doctor was always the ultimate author of the care plan. A stethoscope doesn't tell you what to do, right? It just amplifies the sound of a heartbeat.
Right, it's just a tool.
The doctor still has to make the judgment call on what that heartbeat means for that specific person.
But that is exactly what is changing now. AI is stealthily repositioning these highly trained professionals. Instead of being the primary decision makers, they are increasingly being turned into mere supervisors of automated processes.
Just like watching the machine work.
Exactly. And what makes this so insidious is how it arrives in the hospital. It's disguised as this massive upgrade.
Oh, I'm sure it's pitched as a miracle solution.
What's fascinating here is how institutions completely buy into it. It's sold to hospital administrators as a miracle of efficiency, a way to standardize care, and this essential safety net for overworked staff.
Which, sure, that sounds fantastic on a corporate brochure, but let's translate that corporate framing into actual human stakes. Let's look at what this really looks like on the ground in the day-to-day workflow of, say, a modern ICU.
Yeah, let's look at the daily tasks.
In these AI-enabled environments, a doctor's daily workflow is fundamentally altered. Picture an AI sepsis alert system. It monitors thousands of data points across the hospital. Suddenly, an alarm starts blaring.
High stress immediately.
Right. The algorithm flags a patient as high risk for sepsis and recommends an immediate massive dose of antibiotics. Now, the clinician isn't diagnosing sepsis from scratch anymore, are they?
Not at all. They're being asked to review an algorithmic recommendation.
They're validating a system-generated risk score and then either approving or rejecting a decision that has already been mathematically formulated by a machine.
And we have to look at how that algorithm is actually formulating that decision. Because this isn't just a smarter doctor in a box.
Right, it's not thinking like a human.
No. AI algorithms are trained on vast oceans of historical data. They look for statistical correlations and population-level averages. So the AI projects what an average patient with these specific vital signs needs.
But the patient in front of the doctor is rarely the statistical average.
Exactly. They might have a unique medical history or a really subtle symptom that simply isn't captured in the electronic health record, or maybe a specific genetic quirk. The AI doesn't know medicine through causal reasoning.
It knows mathematical clusters.
Yes. It just matches patterns.
So hospital administrators are deciding that a fast, legally defensible algorithm is better for their bottom line than a doctor taking 10 extra minutes to actually think about the individual patient?
That's the tragic reality of it.
This sounds to me like taking an artisan chef, someone who cooks entirely from scratch, tasting the broth, adjusting the seasoning based on the humidity in the room or the specific batch of vegetables, and turning them into a factory line inspector.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Now, their only job is to stand at a conveyor belt and check if the soup cans are sealed properly. I mean, the soup definitely gets out the door faster, and every can weighs exactly the same. But is that inspector actually cooking anymore?
That is a brilliant visualization of the problem. You're describing a state of governance without authorship.
Governance without authorship, that's powerful.
When decisions originate inside a proprietary black box algorithm and are merely ratified by a human, the clinician shifts from being a caregiver to a monitor. They oversee the outcomes, but they don't actively shape the judgments.
And monitoring is not care.
Fundamentally, it is not. But from an organizational standpoint, administrators love this because it promises consistency. If every doctor follows the AI, you have a highly defensible, standardized protocol.
Oh, wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Honestly, humans are exhausted. Medical residents routinely work 14-hour shifts.
So easily, sometimes longer.
They are running on black coffee and 3 hours of sleep. They make basic math errors when calculating medication dosages at 3 in the morning. I mean, if I'm the patient in that hospital bed, bleeding out or crashing, I might actually prefer the machine that has ingested 10 million medical charts and doesn't need to sleep.
Over the tired resident, sure.
Right. If the AI is objectively faster and highly accurate at pattern recognition, shouldn't doctors just trust it? Isn't strict protocol adherence better than flawed human guessing? Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because there's a trap there, right?
A massive trap. That is the exact argument that sells these systems. But it ignores the lethal danger of context collapse.
Context collapse. What does that mean in practice?
Well, yes, humans get tired and algorithms don't. But when you enforce strict protocol adherence, you are assuming the data the AI is using is a perfect representation of reality.
Which it rarely is.
Exactly. The AI doesn't see the patient sweating. It doesn't know the patient's family just mentioned a bizarre travel history that hasn't been typed into the iPad yet.
It's blind to anything outside its data fields.
If we demand blind trust in the machine, we strip away the only safety net capable of navigating ambiguity, and that is human judgment. And worse, it introduces a massive hidden fragility into the entire healthcare system, the liability trap.
Right. Okay, so if the AI is the one cooking the soup, in our factory analogy, who gets sued if someone gets sick from the soup?
This is where the ethical and legal frameworks completely clash with the technological reality. It's this wild concept of responsibility without control.
That sounds like a nightmare for a doctor.
It is. Even though the AI system is the entity originating the medical decision, the human clinician remains legally and ethically responsible for the outcome.
Wait, really?
Yes, if harm occurs to you as a patient, it is not the software developer in Silicon Valley who gets dragged into a malpractice court.
It's the human doctor standing next to your bed whose medical license is on the line. So wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. If the algorithm demands a specific dosage of a medication based on its protocol, but I, as the human doctor, look at the patient and realize, based on my decade of training, that this dosage is going to destroy this specific patient's kidneys.
Right, you see something the machine misses.
If I override the machine, I'm suddenly taking on 100% of the legal risk. That feels incredibly coercive.
It is entirely coercive.
Yeah.
And it creates a pervasive, toxic culture of defensive medicine. Think about the psychological pressure there.
It must crush him.
If a doctor follows the AI recommendation and the patient tragically dies, the hospital can point to the software and say, well, we followed the mathematically optimized standard of care. It's a tragedy, but we did everything right.
But if the doctor overrides the AI and the patient dies...
Now it's a rogue doctor who ignored the state-of-the-art safety system. It's an instant malpractice suit.
Wow. I can completely see how that breaks a person. If you have to click override 15 times on an iPad, justifying your decision in 5 different text boxes just to prescribe a basic medication you know the patient needs, eventually you're just going to stop fighting.
Exactly. Over time, doctors internalize a very dangerous unspoken message. Their actual job is to ensure the AI functions smoothly, not to question if the AI is right.
Dissenting against the machine becomes professionally risky.
Following the system feels like the only safe harbor, even if their gut is screaming that the system is wrong for this specific patient.
Which brings us to the cognitive toll this takes on the human brain. And I actually have a perfect everyday analogy for this. Think about a time you stubbornly followed Google Maps, even when it didn't make
Oh,
sense.
we've all been there.
You're driving in an unfamiliar area, and the blue line tells you to turn right. You look to the right, and it's a dirt path leading straight into a lake.
But you still hesitate.
Right. Your brain thinks, well, the satellite knows better than I do, and you almost drive into the water. We completely turn off our critical thinking when a confident technological voice tells us what to do. It's like highway hypnosis.
Yes, that is exactly what happens in high-stakes environments. The research dives deep into the cognitive cost of this supervision role.
It's not just boring, it actually degrades your attention.
Monitoring an AI is cognitively demanding, but in a very draining, passive way. It requires sustained vigilance without the grounding of active reasoning.
You have to pay extremely close attention to the system, but you aren't actually allowed to think through the problem yourself from the ground up,
You're just staring at the white lines on the digital highway with the cruise control permanently stuck on.
which is terrifying when lives are on the line.
And borrowing from decades of research in other high-reliability domains like aviation or nuclear power plant operation, we know exactly how this story ends.
I imagine it's not a happy ending.
Not at all. When highly trained humans are placed in supervisory roles without deep active engagement in the task, a predictable cascade of failures occurs. First, you get complacency during normal operations.
Because the machine is usually right, so you just stop double-checking its work.
Exactly. Second, you get heavily delayed reactions when anomalies finally do occur. If the autopilot suddenly disengages, the pilot has lost situational awareness and takes precious seconds to figure out what's happening.
Those seconds can be fatal.
And third, you get a massive over-reliance on automated authority, especially when the human is under time pressure.
Which, in an emergency room, is literally all the time. I mean, if the alarms are blaring and the AI says, push 50 milligrams of this drug, the doctor, whose brain is zoned out on highway hypnosis, isn't going to stop and calculate renal function. They're just going to push the drug.
And that cognitive zoning out leads directly to an emotional detachment, a phenomenon the paper calls moral displacement.
Moral displacement. That sounds deep.
It is. We hear a lot about physician burnout today, and we usually assume it's just about the sheer volume of patients or dealing with insurance companies. But this research argues it's much deeper than that. It's about losing agency.
They aren't allowed to be doctors anymore.
Right. Clinicians derive profound, sustaining meaning from knowing their unique expertise matters, that their specific judgment changed a patient's life.
They spent 12 years in medical school and residency to heal people, not to be a middle manager for a software program.
When a system sidelines that judgment, it destroys the emotional infrastructure of care. It is the crushing daily feeling of having immense legal and moral responsibility, but absolutely zero empowerment to actually practice medicine.
You are carrying the weight of a life, but you aren't allowed to steer the ship.
Exactly.
And because of this cognitive zoning out and this profound emotional detachment, the actual definition of what it means to give care begins to warp entirely. This is where it gets scary for you and me as patients.
It changes the entire paradigm.
The research outlines how judgment becomes strictly procedural. Instead of a doctor sitting with a patient and asking, does this treatment plan make sense for this specific person at this specific moment in their life? Or, what are the second-order consequences for their family if we prescribe this? They are trained by the system to just ask, does this meet protocol?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the lens of judgment narrows drastically. It becomes entirely conditional and reactive.
So care just becomes a checklist.
Care risks becoming technically correct according to the algorithm, but contextually entirely wrong for the human being in the hospital bed.
Give me an example of what that actually looks like for a patient.
Okay, let's say an AI system analyzes a patient's lab results
Mm-hmm.
and determines the mathematically optimal treatment for their condition is a highly specific, complex medication regimen.
Okay, makes sense so far.
Procedurally, the AI is 100% correct. The doctor signs off on it because the system demands it. But the AI didn't factor in that the patient is elderly, lives completely alone, has mild dementia, and won't be able to manage a complex schedule of pills.
Oh, wow. So they're going to mix up the meds.
Or it didn't factor in that the medication costs $1,000 a month and the patient will simply skip doses to save money.
So the care is correct on the iPad, but in reality, it's a complete failure. The patient ends up back in the emergency room a week later.
Exactly. This transformation from contextual care to procedural care isn't an accident. It is driven by active governance decisions.
People are choosing this.
Yes. Hospital boards and administrators are making deliberate choices about how authority is allocated, where override rights exist, and how fast these systems are paced. They're actively choosing throughput over human agency.
Because it looks better on a spreadsheet.
But here's the critical distinction. Monitoring detects failures and reacts to thresholds. True care prevents failures.
That's a huge difference.
True care navigates ambiguity and recognizes when the rigid algorithmic thresholds are actually wrong. In complex, human-centered systems like healthcare, human judgment is not some messy, expensive inefficiency that needs to be optimized away by a tech company. Judgment is a core safety function.
Okay, so what do we do about this? Because AI isn't going anywhere. It's only getting faster and more integrated. Are we just completely doomed to a future of algorithmic medicine where our doctors are just glorified screen tappers?
I don't think we're doomed now.
The research says we need to intentionally redesign these roles, but what does that actually look like in practice? How do we fix this before it's too late?
It requires a radical shift in how we implement these tools. The authors lay out several critical structural commitments to fix this. First, we have to preserve decision origination for humans in high-stakes contexts.
Meaning the human goes first.
Right. The AI should assist in gathering data or flagging unseen patterns, but it should not initiate the final recommendation. The doctor must start the cognitive process.
That makes total sense. The AI is the sous chef, prepping the ingredients, but the human is still the one cooking the soup.
Exactly. Second, we must ensure clinicians can easily interrogate and reshape the system's behavior. It cannot be a black box that spits out demands with no explanation.
You need to know why it's saying what it's saying.
A doctor needs to be able to ask the system, why are you recommending this? And actually get a comprehensible answer.
And they need to be able to do that without clicking through 15 different screens while a patient is coding.
Third, and this is arguably the most difficult cultural shift, hospitals must legitimize slowdown and dissent.
Slowdown, interesting.
If a doctor feels the AI is wrong, they need the time, the space, and the institutional backing to say, stop, we're doing this my way. Efficiency cannot trump safety.
But that requires hospital administrators to accept that sometimes moving slower is actually better care. That's a tough pill to swallow for a board of directors looking at quarterly margins.
It is a tough sell, but it brings us to the final necessary commitment. We have to align accountability with actual control.
Fixing the liability trap.
You cannot hold a doctor legally and professionally responsible for a machine's unexplainable output.
Yeah.
If the hospital mandates the use of an algorithm, the hospital and the algorithm developer must share the liability when it fails.
That is the silver bullet right there. If the tech companies and the hospital administrators suddenly had to take on the malpractice risk for the algorithms they are forcing doctors to use, I guarantee you those systems would be redesigned to empower doctors overnight.
Oh, it would fundamentally change the entire industry immediately. Healthcare systems have to actively decide right now whether clinicians are going to be respected partners in judgment or just legal shock absorbers and custodians of automation.
Let's wrap up these core insights because this transition from caregiver to monitor is a profound statement about what kind of intelligence we as a society actually value.
It really is.
Are we going to prioritize procedural intelligence, the ability to follow a checklist, process massive amounts of data quickly, and avoid institutional liability? Or are we going to value moral and contextual intelligence?
The human element.
The ability to look at a terrified patient in a hospital gown, read the room, understand their unique life circumstances, and know exactly what they need in that specific moment.
As AI systems become more capable, the temptation is going to be enormous for hospitals to further narrow the human role to just supervision and compliance. It looks cheaper, it looks cleaner, and it looks safer on paper.
But resisting that temptation isn't just about nostalgia for the good old days of medicine. It is about foresight and actual safety. Because when complex systems inevitably fail, and if the history of technology tells us anything, it is that they always, always fail. The AI monitors whose brains are zoned out on highway hypnosis won't be the ones to save you.
No, they won't.
It will be the caregivers who still remember how to exercise independent human judgment.
That is the ultimate takeaway from this research. Human judgment is the final, irreplaceable safety net that algorithms simply cannot replicate.
So, the next time you visit a doctor and you notice they are glued to a screen, clicking through prompts and validating risk scores, don't just get frustrated. Realize that you are witnessing this invisible, high-stakes battle for human agency firsthand. And before we go, I want to turn this mirror directly onto you, the listener.
Yeah, it applies everywhere.
Think about your own job, whatever field you are in. Are you still actively creating, synthesizing, and exercising your own independent judgment? Or have subtle technological tools quietly shifted you into being merely a monitor of automated outputs? Are you still cooking the soup, or are you just checking the cans? And if the machine fails tomorrow, will you still know how to do the work?